Let me ask you a question. If I told you your blood pressure was 148/74, would that concern you? Most people would say yes. Some doctors would start thinking about medication. But here's the uncomfortable truth. That number might tell us very little about how stressed your heart actually is. And today, I want to show you why. Blood pressure is one of the most measured things in medicine, but it's also one of the most misunderstood, because what we actually measure is arm blood pressure. But what also matters is central blood pressure, the pressure your heart sees with every beat. Arm blood pressure and central blood pressure are not the same thing. And unless you look beyond the arm, you could miss important context. This is where newer technologies like CONNEQT come in, not to replace standard blood pressure measurement, but to add a little bit more depth to it. So what does your arm actually measure? When you measure blood pressure on the arm, you get two numbers. The first one, on the top normally, is systolic pressure. That's the peak pressure when the left ventricle, the left side of your heart, contracts. And then there's diastolic pressure, the pressure during relaxation, influenced mainly by resistance in smaller blood vessels. These measurements are reliable, they're validated, and they absolutely matter. But they're still measuring what's happening in the periphery, not directly at the heart. Now, let's make this practical. Imagine a 25-year-old, tall, slim, and physically active. Their blood pressure comes back at 135/75. Let's pause for a moment. Is that blood pressure dangerous? Well, in young people, arteries are elastic. The aorta, which is a big vessel coming out from the heart, stretches when the heart ejects blood, absorbing some of that pressure. As the pressure wave travels outward towards the arm, it becomes amplified. So the arm can see a higher systolic pressure than the heart itself does. This is known as pulse pressure amplification. For a very long time, this pattern was often labeled as physiological or normal, especially in younger adults. And in many people, that's still true. It can reflect strong heart function and flexible blood vessels, and it may never cause problems. However, in some people, the same pattern can be an early sign that the heart and blood vessels are under slightly more strain than expected for their age. This does not mean there's an urgent problem, but it does mean it's worth looking a little bit more deeper rather than assuming it's always harmless. And you would not necessarily see this nuance from arm blood pressure alone. This brings us to pulse pressure. Pulse pressure is simply systolic blood pressure minus diastolic blood pressure, but physiologically it reflects several things at once. For example, how much blood the heart ejects, how elastic the arteries are, and how pressure waves behave in the circulation. A wider pulse pressure can mean very different things in different people. Context matters. Now, let me introduce a concept most people have never been told about. How fast pressure waves move through your arteries matters. This is called pulse wave velocity. Think of it like a ripple in water. In young, elastic arteries, the vessel waves stretch easily. The pressure wave moves more slowly, like a ripple spreading through soft water. The reflected wave takes longer to come back, and it returns whilst the heart is relaxing. That timing is helpful because it doesn't add extra strain to the heart. In stiffer arteries, waves travel faster. Reflections come back early during contraction of the heart. And when reflected waves arrive early, they increase central systolic pressure and cardiac or heart workload. And that extra pressure is called augmentation pressure. When we express it as a percentage, we call it the augmentation index. Think of it like this. As mentioned, your heart sends out a wave. Your arteries send one back. If it returns late, no problem. If it returns early, it stacks on top of the systolic pressure. This is when your heart is contracting. And that extra load is largely invisible on standard arm blood pressure readings. Now, onto another concept. It's not just about how hard the heart is working, but it's also about whether it's getting enough blood to meet the demand. This balance is captured by SEVR. In simple terms, SEVR compares two things: oxygen supply, which is how much blood the heart can receive whilst it's relaxing between beats, and the oxygen demand, how much oxygen the heart muscle actually needs while it contracts to pump blood. The heart gets most of its refueling during relaxation. If the blood pressure is high or relaxation is short, that supply window shrinks, and this means the heart might need more oxygen while getting less blood to supply it. And this can happen even when arm blood pressure looks normal. So SEVR helps us understand this supply versus demand balance inside of the heart muscle. Now, I've mentioned central blood pressure a few times, but what does that actually mean? And why does it matter? Central blood pressure reflects the pressure in the aorta, which is the main vessel coming out of the heart, close to the heart. Devices like the CONNEQT estimate the central blood pressure by analyzing the pulse waveform recorded by a standard arm cuff using validated mathematical models. What we often see is this: in younger adults with high arm readings, central blood pressure is often normal. The waveform is smooth. But in older adults or those with more stiff arteries, central pressure tends to rise. And as mentioned before, the early wave reflection becomes visible. So it's the same arm number, but very different stress on the heart. Can you trust these numbers? So we need to ask an important question: how reliable are all of these measurements we talked about? Let's start with the most solid ones first. Brachial, so on the arm, systolic and diastolic blood pressure from CONNEQT are highly reliable. They use standard cuff technology, widely validated in clinical practice. Heart rate is also very accurate, as it's derived directly from the pulse waveform. These figures are the most trustworthy numbers. Central blood pressure and central pulse pressure are estimated values. CONNEQT uses technology aligned with devices like Sigmore Core XL, which is a reference standard in this field. And compared with invasive aortic measurements, correlation is strong, but there are some differences, usually within about 5 millimeters per mercury. However, individual readings can vary a bit more sometimes. So these values are best used to understand physiology and track trends over time. Metrics like augmentation index, pulse pressure amplification, and SEVR are more sensitive. They're influenced by waveform quality and measurement conditions. They are very insightful, but they should support, not replace, clinical judgment. So here's a simple hierarchy. Most reliable, as always, the arm blood pressure and the heart rate. Reliable with context, central blood pressure and central pulse pressure. Insightful, but use very cautiously, augmentation index, pulse pressure amplification, and SEVR. Understanding this hierarchy is key. So to summarize, blood pressure is not just a number, it's a wave, it's a reflection, it's a conversation between the heart, the arteries, the aorta, and your arm. So devices like CONNEQT don't replace traditional blood pressure measurement, but it could augment it by helping us understand not just what the number is, but why it looks like the way it does is very, very important. And that's where better prevention and better decisions begin. Follow us, Doc Dialogue, for more videos like this. Feel free to drop a comment and give us a like.